So, you work as a lawyer? Emily asked with a smile, delicately spearing a leaf of lettuce with her fork. Yes, Stephen muttered. His efforts had nearly drained the wine bottle, but the dinner wasn't improving. Giving his mother advance notice of his visit had clearly been a mistake. She had invited the daughter of her therapist, a lovely girl studying to be a psychologist. Oh, darling, why are you so shy? Stevie is planning to start his own firm. He has an extensive client base, his mother boasted. Stephen, you mentioned your last relationship ended 6 months ago. Emily began politely, taking a sip from her glass. I didn't say anything about my relationships. You need to pay better attention, Stephen snapped. That woman broke my boy's heart. We don't talk about her, his mother, Amanda, interjected, adding another spoonful of salad to Stephen's plate. Mom! Stephen exclaimed. Stephen, may I ask you a question? Emily smiled sweetly and took a sip of water. Go ahead, Stephen sighed. Are you an undecided bisexual, or am I wasting my time here? Emily asked bluntly. I think you'll do well in your chosen career, Stephen replied with a smile. His mother groaned in disappointment. Mr. Thornton stared at the ceiling, processing the information. The nightmare of that last dinner at his parents' house haunted Stephen even 2 weeks later. After his response to Emily, she had politely finished her meal, said goodbye to Mrs. Thornton, and left, leaving her number along with information about her single cousin. She was gone, but Stephen couldn't leave. He stayed for an endless lecture about how, you can't live like this, you're going to hell, dear, and other nonsense. From a young age, Stephen seemed destined for success. Good looks, athletic achievements in school competitions, excellent grades throughout his education, a good job, and his own apartment. The perfect son who made one crucial mistake in his disappointed parents' eyes. He came out as gay without hiding it. The phone rang again. Stephen got out of bed, pressing the green answer button on the go. Good morning, sweetheart. His mom greeted him. Hi, Mom. How are you? Stephen asked. Great. Today is cleaning day and I need to go grocery shopping. I wanted to check when you're coming over. His mom asked. Tomorrow at 3, Stephen replied, heading to the kitchen and putting the kettle on. Excellent, Edward and his girlfriend Catherine are coming too, his mom said. I've been looking forward to meeting her, Stephen admitted. Stealing your brother's girlfriend is bad form, my dear, his mom responded. Mom, I'm still gay, so I'm not planning to steal anyone. Stephen reassured. You disappoint me again, his mom replied. Just like you disappoint me, Mom. I don't want to discuss this, Stephen said angrily. All right, see you tomorrow. We'll come up with something, his mom concluded. Don't come up with anything, Stephen yelled, but all he heard was the dial tone. Stephen cursed, staring at the darkened screen of his phone, his mom again. The main thing was to hope she hadn't invited someone over for him to meet again. His heavy thoughts were interrupted by loud voices outside his apartment door in the stairwell. Stephen stepped into the hallway, listening. You're a month late on the rent, the landlord was shouting. I'm sorry, I promise I'll pay it all soon. The bank is holding up my paycheck. It should come through any day now. His neighbor, Matthew Wright, responded. Intrigued, Thornton cracked his door open to see the retreating back of the landlord and Matthew Wright, who rented the apartment. Matthew was a good guy, someone Stephen had recently met. Sorry for the noise, Matthew said, noticing Stephen and waving hello. No problem. Trouble with rent? Stephen asked, taking in his neighbor's appearance. Ripped jeans, an oversized Pink Floyd tank top, studded bracelets on his wrists, and a streak of white in his dark hair. My paycheck was sent to my card, but the bank is holding it up. Holidays, what can you do? Matthew smiled. Want to earn some money? I'll pay this month's and the next 2 months' rent, Stephen offered, unexpectedly. Why the generosity? Matthew asked. I need a boyfriend, Stephen replied. Sorry, you're great, but I don't sleep with people for money. Find someone else. Matthew's pleasant face took on harsh, unpleasant lines. You misunderstand. I need a fake boyfriend, for my parents. My relationship with them is complicated, and they're always trying to set me up with women, which I don't need, Stephen explained. You want to show them a guy so they'll back off? Matthew asked. Yes, so are you in? Stephen smiled. Why me? Can't you find someone real? Matthew inquired. I'm already married, to my job. I don't have time to find a real boyfriend, and the idea for a fake one just came to me, Stephen justified. 3 months' rent, Matthew clarified. Exactly. 1 month up front, the rest will be transferred to your card, Stephen confirmed. Deal, Matthew smiled, glancing down the stairs where the landlord had disappeared.
Hear the fire's gentle call, and the flurries will not fall. Stay a while, let's be. Snowflakes dance through the night. Your eyes, they shine so bright. Moments just like these. Don't rush away. Let's drift and sway. In this winter's warmth we'll stay. Winds whispering outside. In this glow we'll reside. Hearts in perfect sync. Don't rush away. Let's drift and sway. In this winter's warmth we'll stay. Winds whispering outside. In this glow we'll reside. Hearts in perfect sync.
The closer they got to the house, the darker Stephen's mood became. Matthew glanced at Steve, who had been silent the entire drive, and sighed. What had he gotten himself into? He could have gone home for Christmas and spent the holidays happily with his mom. But money was tight. Almost all his earnings from side jobs went to pay rent, and his university stipend was just enough for groceries. Asking his mom for money was beneath him. Are your parents homophobes? Matthew asked. Should I ask if there's any weapon in the house? There's a shotgun, but I don't think we need to worry, Stephen replied, keeping his eyes on the road. That's reassuring. How should I behave? Matthew asked. Just be yourself. How do you usually act? Stephen responded. I don't know. Normal, I guess. Matthew's uncertainty made Stephen smile a bit. Then just act like that, Stephen said, feeling annoyed and thinking this was a mistake. Tell me about yourself, Matthew requested. Stephen Thornton, 26, lawyer. Played football in school. Was the captain. I love sci-fi movies, listen to rock, and enjoy reading, Stephen answered. Sounds like you filled out a form, Matthew replied, reaching out to turn on the radio, where a cheerful announcer's voice greeted them. Baby, It's Cold Outside started playing, and Stephen quickly turned the volume down. Not a fan of the song? Matthew asked, surprised by Stephen's reaction. My mom always sings it. It's the best thing that happens between a man and a woman, son. Stephen mimicked his mother. But darling, it's cold outside, Matthew softly sang. Do you think we should impress your mom with a duet just to see her reaction? She wouldn't survive it, Stephen replied, pulling up to the house and stopping by the garage. We're here. It's not too late to pretend you got the wrong house and turn back. Matthew tried to stop what seemed like madness. Too late, Stephen sighed, nodding toward his smiling mother standing on the porch, ready to greet her eldest son. Stephen jumped out of the car, intending to open the door for Matthew. You're a terrible actor, Matthew whispered.
Don't stand still tonight, in the fire's gentle light. Together everything's alright. Don't rush away, let's drift and sway. In this winter's warmth we'll stay.
Amanda's smile faded as she saw a young man of questionable appearance arriving with her son. Meanwhile, the same smile appeared on the face of this young man. Matthew beamed and quickly approached the woman, taking her hand, bending down, and kissing it. My name is Matthew Wright. Nice to meet you. I'm your son's fiancé, he introduced himself. Amanda, she responded automatically. I've heard so much about you. Matthew continued, still smiling. Only good things, of course. You have a lovely home. I'm very impressed. Sorry for being late. Steve and I hurried as much as we could, but we couldn't get here sooner. This is for dinner. I hope we haven't missed it, Matthew said, pulling a bottle of red wine from his jacket pocket. No, we were waiting for you, Mrs. Thornton replied quietly. Please come in. Mom, it's good to see you, Stephen said, kissing his mother on the cheek, hugging her, and then walking into the house. You're a great actor. Stephen whispered quietly as he took off his coat. I didn't expect you to be this good. Why are you looking at me like that? Haven't you ever seen a hypocrite before? Matt whispered back, handing his outerwear to his fiancée. Thornton just smiled. Amanda, recovering from the shock, followed them like a silent shadow. Here we are, Stephen announced loudly, opening the living room doors. Besides his father, younger brother, and his girlfriend, there was another unfamiliar woman at the table. Any doubts Stephen had about bringing Matthew to the family gathering vanished. "Steve, I thought you decided to ditch us for the holiday." Edward approached his brother, clapping him on the shoulder. "Finally, you'll meet Kat in person." Matthew, standing behind Stephen, mentally marveled at the brothers' resemblance, both tall, dark-haired, and gray-eyed, with strong builds. The younger brother was broader in the shoulders, a swimmer as Matt had learned. Edward's girlfriend, Catherine, was a pretty blonde with a round face and a gentle smile. The second woman, her cousin Alice, had more angular features.
Don't rush away, let's drift and sway. In this winter's warmth we'll stay. Don't rush away, let's drift and sway. In this winter's warmth we'll stay.
"Who is this with you?" Edward asked, peeking behind his brother. Matt smiled. "His boyfriend," Amanda replied in a grave voice as she floated into the room. "Fiancé," Stephen corrected his mother with a broad smile. Amanda dropped her glass to the floor, thankfully empty. "What?" Mr. Thornton rasped. "Son? Marriage? To a man?" "It happens, Dad," Stephen smiled. An awkward silence filled the room. "At least we can be sure this marriage isn't due to pregnancy," Kathy said, biting her lip as she looked at the new couple. Matt already liked her. "I'll get the salad," Edward said quickly, heading to the kitchen. "I'll come with you." Catherine followed him. Laughter echoed from the kitchen. Not waiting for Stephen's reaction, Matthew decided to take matters into his own hands. "Matthew Wright, nice to meet you." Awkward conversations about the weather ended completely. To break the silent atmosphere, Matthew ran his fork loudly across his plate, catching everyone's attention. "Where's the ring?" Edward suddenly asked. Mr. and Mrs. Thornton simultaneously choked in a family-like manner. "I haven't bought it yet," Stephen answered. "It didn't fit," Matthew said at the same time. They exchanged glances. "I'll buy a new one, darling," Stephen said, hoping his smile looked tender. "I'll go with you to pick it out, sweetheart. You can't be trusted with this," Matthew smiled. "You two are so sickeningly sweet," Alice grumbled. "Adorable." Catherine corrected with emphasis. "Yes, we are," Matthew beamed, feeling Stephen gently kick him under the table. "How did you two meet?" Catherine asked. "It happened at a club." Matthew tucked his legs under his chair where Stephen couldn't reach them. "Someone started bothering me, and Stephen, like a knight, defended my honor." "Oh my God." Stephen blushed and covered his ears, trying not to hear the nonsense his fiancée was spewing. "That's sweet," Edward said. The older generation maintained a mournful silence. "I don't think I want to hear the details," Amanda said, placing her empty glass on the table with a thud. "Problems?" Stephen asked, placing his hand on Matthew's under the stern gaze of 3 disapproving faces. "Plenty," Amanda replied, unconsciously clutching the cross on her chest. "No problems, son," his father said. "But, dear," Amanda tried to protest. "It's Christmas Eve, darling." "I think we should postpone this conversation until another time," Mr. Thornton soothed her. Amanda, raised by strict parents, didn't dare openly defy her husband, who was almost resigned to their son's choice. "It's getting quite late. We have a lot to do tomorrow. Let's get ready for bed." Catherine shifted the focus to herself. Frankly, everyone needed to disperse and calm down, drawing their own conclusions. Or just calm down, yes. At the very least, that. Because the only ones truly comfortable were Edward, happy for his brother, and Catherine, reflecting her boyfriend's joy. Alice, the cousin, felt a bit out of place, but Kathy had warned her not to expect much. Not all gay men can be converted to the normal side. The cousin chose not to heed her warning, and Catherine wasn't going to feel awkward about it. "Is my room still mine?" Stephen asked his mother, as he did every time he stayed overnight at his parents' house. Of course, dear. And I think we can comfortably set up your friend in the living room. Amanda smiled sincerely. In my room, Stephen responded firmly. Well, that's settled then. I'll read for a bit before bed, dear, and then I'll join you. Good night, everyone. Mr. Thornton was the first to rise from the table. Will you show me your room, sweetheart? Matthew asked, beaming and gently stroking his fiancée's hand. Of course. Let's go, Stephen replied, rising and deliberately ignoring his mother's disapproving look. Sweet dreams, everyone, Matthew said, getting up. Good night, Stephen echoed, taking Matthew's hand and heading for the stairs. They were met with similar well wishes. Did I do okay? Matthew asked once they were alone. Probably. I'm not great at pretending relationships, Stephen admitted. I don't believe it's that bleak on the personal front, Matthew said, grabbing the towel and clothes prepared for him. Relationships aren't for me, Stephen replied. Are you just into one-night stands? Matthew asked. There's simply no time for anything else, Stephen answered. Mind if I use the bathroom first? Matthew asked, sensing some tension. No problem, Stephen said. Don't you think the bed is too narrow for the two of us? Matthew asked. Should it feel that way? Stephen chuckled, oddly pleased by Matthew's embarrassment. It seemed endearing. No, Matthew's cheeks turned a slight shade of pink. He turned and headed to the bathroom. Stephen tried to suppress his smile, delighted at the thought of sharing a narrow bed with a cute guy. Feeling something was missing, Stephen turned over in his sleep, pulling the pillow under him. Unconsciously, he grabbed the second pillow that was next to him. Opening his eyes, he realized he was alone in bed. Matthew was gone. Yawning, Stephen reached for his phone. It was 6 a.m. Any remnants of sleep vanished in a panic, and Stephen got out of bed. In an instant, he was running down the stairs, wondering where Matthew could have gone. There was no one in the guest room, and his father's library was occupied only by its owner, whom Stephen greeted. He didn't find his mother either. Heading towards the kitchen, Stephen remembered that Edward and his girlfriend had planned to go to the mall in the morning to pick up a few things and just hang out, so they were already gone. Approaching the kitchen doors, Stephen heard Matthew singing. Listen to the fireplace roar. I better scurry. Beautiful, please don't hurry. Put some records on while I pour. Baby, it's cold outside, Stephen sang as he entered the kitchen. Matthew turned sharply, his face showing surprise that quickly turned to irritation. You need a bell around your neck. You can't just sneak up on people like that, Matthew said. You have a great voice, Stephen smiled. Not just the voice, baby. Want to be even more impressed? I couldn't find any Christmas cookies in the fridge, so I decided to make them myself, Matthew announced. You cook? You don't look like a guy who knows how to cook. Stephen looked Matthew over, noting the tight black jeans, a Marvel Universe tank top, and a women's headband holding back his long bangs. What's with the accusatory tone? I'm just like you. A guy who loves old movies, theater, and musicals, Matthew said, giving Stephen a mock disdainful glance over his shoulder. Matthew opened the oven, carefully placed the filled molds on a tray, and closed it. Want to help decorate the cupcakes? I've already made the frosting. They bake quickly, Matthew asked with a wide smile. Sure, Stephen replied, stepping closer to Matthew. By the way, where did the headband come from? Katie gave it to me. Your brother is lucky. She's really sweet, Matthew replied. Yeah, I think so too, Stephen agreed. Matthew, why aren't you spending Christmas with your family? Stephen asked. My father is gone and my mom lives far away. I don't have a car. I called and wished her a Merry Christmas. I'll visit her later. How could I leave my fiancée? Matthew smiled, rubbing his neck. You've got flour on your cheek and on your neck, Stephen said, stepping even closer. Really? Matthew touched his right cheek with his hand, smudging the flour even more. Stephen instinctively reached forward, touching Matthew's skin with his fingers. He didn't wipe away the flour, but couldn't bring himself to lower his hand. Matthew leaned in first and kissed Stephen, and it was magical. Matthew's flour-covered fingers tangled in Stephen's hair, tugging it painfully. And it felt amazing. Matthew's lips and tongue brought exquisite pleasure. Stephen's hands roamed down Matthew's ribs and waist, moving lower. It was hot in every sense. Feeling Matthew's cool fingers on his neck, Stephen exhaled, trying to keep control. He wasn't succeeding. "I'll remove the mistletoe from the kitchen," Amanda's voice sounded behind them. Stephen looked up and saw the sprig of mistletoe attached to the ceiling. "I don't think we need a silly branch to kiss," Matthew smiled tensely, slipping out of Stephen's arms. "You two need to keep it together," Amanda shouted, pale and displeased. Matthew flinched. Stephen wrapped his arm around Matthew's waist. "Sweetheart, how are the cupcakes? We were going to decorate them, right?" Matthew asked with a nervous smile. "Yes, darling," Stephen smiled. Amanda shot her son a disapproving look and left to greet Edward and Katie, who had just come in. "Matt, do you still want to decorate the cupcakes together?" Stephen asked. "Yeah, that's part of the plan," Matthew said, glancing up from the baking. "What plan?" Stephen asked, then realized what Matthew meant. "Everything's fine," Matthew said with a cheerful smile, but Stephen didn't like the smile. Edward walked into the kitchen and addressed his brother. "Stephen, can we talk? Sorry to interrupt." Edward gave Matthew a smile. "Everything's fine. I just need to finish up, and your brother is distracting me," Matthew replied with a smile. "You usually like it when I distract you," Stephen smiled back. "Not in your parents' house, sweetie," Matthew responded. "They're my parents. Keeping up moral standards is my responsibility," Stephen said with a smile. "You're not very good at it. I always have to take charge. As usual, right, darling?" Matthew leaned against the table, tilting his head to the side and exposing his neck seductively. Stephen gulped audibly and laughed, knowing Matthew was the one who initiated the kiss. Stephen glanced at his brother, who was looking away, waiting for the couple to finish their playful banter. Matthew was a bad influence on him, Stephen felt, but it felt so good. "Stop embarrassing my brother," Stephen tried to sound stern but failed. "It's not easy to embarrass me, brother," Edward replied. "Tell me that when the blush leaves your cheeks," Stephen countered. "Just go," Matthew said, pulling a bowl of frosting towards him. Edward and Stephen left the kitchen. "What did you want?" Stephen asked. "I'm your brother. We haven't seen each other in a while. Isn't that reason enough to talk?" Edward asked. Under his brother's gaze, Edward laughed. "Okay, I want a moment of honesty. I'm not Mom. You can't fool me. Who's the guy baking cupcakes in our kitchen?" Edward asked. "My fiancé," Stephen replied. "A week ago, you didn't even have a boyfriend, and now you have a fiancé," Edward said. "Love at first sight," Stephen replied, but Edward shook his head. "Maybe love at first sight, but you're not that kind of person. Don't get me wrong, Matthew is a nice guy, and I see how you look at him, and how he looks at you, but you two aren't even dating, so my question stands. Who is he?" Edward asked. "My neighbor. I asked him to pretend to be my fiancé," Stephen admitted. "I can understand why you did it. Mom's been hounding you about dating girls." Edward smiled. "You got it right, so we're done talking," Stephen replied. "And they always held you up as an example to me growing up," Edward continued to smile. "Until I told our parents I was gay," Stephen replied. "I'm your younger brother. You can always count on me, okay?" Edward asked. "Of course, thanks. Sometimes I forget how great you are," Stephen said, giving Edward a warm smile.
Winds whispering outside, in this oversized, in this oversized, in this oversized.
"What are you going to do about Matthew?" Edward asked. "I don't know. I like him, but our relationship started off wrong. Under different circumstances, I might not have even noticed him. But I do want to build something real with him," Stephen replied honestly. "Good luck," Edward smiled, patting Stephen on the shoulder as he left the hallway. Stephen glanced at the kitchen door, from behind which he could hear Matthew singing a song he didn't recognize. Lost in thought, Stephen wondered how to tell Matthew he wanted a real relationship with him. Gathering his resolve, he pushed open the door. "We need to talk," Stephen said, surprised at how cliché it sounded. Are you breaking up with me? Did I do something wrong? Matthew asked, reading the tone. No, everything's great. Stephen started, but he was interrupted by Catherine. Guys, perfect timing. Let's grab a bite. Edward and I brought pizza. We should eat it before Mrs. Thornton finds out. Catherine said. Mom hates pizza, Stephen explained to a puzzled Matthew. We're waiting for you upstairs, Catherine said as she left. They're conspiring. Matthew, I wanted to say that we could. Stephen tried to continue. Come on, Stephen, they're calling us. Matthew cut him off, running out of the kitchen. Matthew, wait, Stephen shouted. Matthew was already heading up the stairs, clearly not in the mood to listen.
Winds whispering outside, in this glow oversized, in this glow oversized, in this glow oversized.
Having dinner with the family turned out to be a terrible idea, as the nightmare of the evening intensified. Cousin Alice, who had no shame in touching Stephen in front of everyone, joined them once again. Do you dislike being touched by women? Alice asked, smiling. I'll try to survive, Stephen replied, noticing the tension on Matthew's face. Sweetie, don't worry. Stephen just hasn't realized what he likes yet, Mrs. Thornton said, looking affectionately at Alice. Dear, maybe you should pour some wine? Mr. Thornton interrupted his wife. It's a shame we'll only get grandchildren from the younger son, Alice said with a smile. Alice, behave yourself, Catherine shouted. I'm calling a taxi. There's no reason for me to stay here, Alice responded, pulling out her phone. Finally, Matthew muttered quietly. And you, young man. Mrs. Thornton pointed her finger at Matthew. Dear, I think you should hold back. You might regret it later, Mr. Thornton urged his wife. I won't regret it, Amanda yelled. Mom! Stephen stood up. My personal life is personal and none of your business. I've tried to do something so we could understand each other. It's useless. I've realized once again, this is the last time I'm coming here. Tomorrow, Matthew and I will be gone. You can breathe a sigh of relief. Merry Christmas. With that, Stephen left the room, ignoring his mother's reddening eyes. He had said enough, so it was better to leave and collect himself. In the room where he had spent his childhood and youth, he fell face down onto the bed, something he always loved to do. His own immaturity in certain matters frustrated him. His mother, after all these years, still couldn't accept his choices. Numerous arguments flashed before his eyes. He couldn't take everything so personally. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. How are you? Matthew stood at the door. How do you think? Come in. I won't bite unless you ask. Stephen turned his head towards him. It's not that bad, calm down, Matthew said seriously. He walked into the room, carefully placed 2 glasses on the table, then closed and locked the door. Make yourself comfortable, Stephen said, sitting up on the bed to make room for Matthew. Merry Christmas, Matthew, Stephen sighed, clinking his glass against Matthew's. Merry Christmas. It could have been worse. Matthew smiled and took a sip. How could it be worse? We're leaving as soon as we wake up tomorrow. Stephen finished his wine and set the glass down. I'll make this a real holiday for you. Bite me, Matthew smiled, placing his hands on Stephen's shoulders. What? Stephen didn't understand. Okay, you talked me into it. I'll do it myself, Matthew grinned. Matthew leaned in and kissed him. A bite followed the kiss, on the lower lip, as if Matthew knew exactly what Stephen liked. Hungry kisses were everywhere, and hot hands too. All the problems, arguments, and the fact that the entire family was downstairs didn't matter at all, and it was absolutely wonderful. In the morning, Matthew looked at Stephen's sleeping face and thought about how far they had taken things. Carefully getting out of bed, Matthew buttoned up his warm sweater. His phone notified him that the taxi had arrived and was waiting near the next house. Quickly writing a note, Matthew kissed Stephen on the cheek, couldn't resist one more look, and quietly left the room and the Thornton house. Stephen crumpled the piece of paper that had an account number written on it. Matthew had run off, there was no doubt about it, leaving Stephen alone to deal with his own feelings. Like anyone else, Stephen was selfish. Matthew's presence had unexpectedly become essential in his life. Now Stephen realized that clearly. "Damn it," Stephen shouted, smoothing out the paper. He transferred the money to Matthew's account, got ready, and left the house. "Good luck," Edward called from the window. "Thanks. Apologize to Mom for me," Stephen replied, waving. Stephen got into his car and headed to the city. When no one answered the door after the second and third rings, Stephen kicked the door several times. Where could that runaway guy be? Amazingly, the kick seemed to work like magic, and Matthew's voice came from behind the door. "Who is it?" Stephen had a lot to say, but only one thing felt right. So he sang, "I was hoping you'd stay the night." A reply came from behind the door. "I thought you didn't like that song." "What's the point in hurting my pride?" Stephen continued. "Stop immediately," Matthew shouted. "Your touch gives me the chills," Stephen persisted. Matthew couldn't take it anymore and opened the door. "I'm embarrassed for you. This is worse than in the movies." "You just need a white horse," Matthew said. "If you want, I'll find a horse, maybe even a white one. I know someone who works at the racetrack. Where are you planning to go?" Stephen asked, seeing the boxes behind Matthew. "I can't afford this apartment. I'll find something cheaper," Matthew replied, looking away. "I transferred money to your account," Stephen said. "I know, I got the notification." "Thanks, it was nice working with you," Matthew smiled. Matthew fell silent. Stephen didn't know what to say, but an idea came to mind. "Want a job as my boyfriend?" Stephen asked. "No, I don't," Matthew replied, irritated. "Sharing an apartment is cheaper," Stephen continued. "Your parents aren't here, honey," Matthew fumed. "They can always show up unexpectedly, and my boyfriend should be here." Stephen smiled. "I was your fiancé, wasn't I?" Matthew asked. "I think we'll consider your career advancement after the probationary period," Stephen grinned. "What if I have a better job?" Matthew asked. "Do you really?" Stephen asked, genuinely worried and hoping it wasn't true. "No," Matthew replied, trying to hold back a smile. "So is your answer yes?" Stephen clarified. "Your lips are so tempting," Matthew replied. Matthew reached out, grabbed Stephen by the collar, and pulled him close. Together, they moved Matthew's boxes into Stephen's apartment and started building their relationship. Stephen earned well, so all Matthew had to do was focus on his studies at university. After graduating, Matthew got a job as a manager. A few years later, they bought a new, bigger apartment together.
Hear the fire's gentle call, and the flurries will not fall. Stay a while, let's be. Snowflakes dance through the night. Your eyes, they shine so bright. Moments just like these. Don't rush away. Let's drift and sway. In this winter's warmth, we'll stay. Winds whispering outside. In this glow, we'll reside. Hearts in perfect sync. Don't rush away. Let's drift and sway. In this winter's warmth, we'll stay. Winds whispering outside. In this glow, we'll reside. Hearts in perfect sync. Don't stand still tonight. In the fire's gentle light. Together everything's alright. Don't rush away. Let's drift and sway. In this winter's warmth, we'll stay. Don't rush away. Let's drift and sway. In this winter's warmth, we'll stay. Don't rush away. Let's drift and sway. In this winter's warmth, we'll stay. Winds whispering outside. In this glow, we'll reside. Hearts in perfect sync. Don't rush away. Let's drift and sway. In this winter's warmth, we'll stay. Winds whispering outside. In this glow we'll reside. In this glow we'll reside. In this glow we'll reside.